Hi there, I'm Alison from Boomerang Pilates and the MoveSMART Teacher Training Program. And today we're going to do a little series of exercises that are great for people who tend to have sort of sliding into center feet. So those can be referred to as fallen arches or pronation of the foot, where the ankle and the foot tend in towards center rather than being nice and stable at the midline. So the first exercise is called the human Pez dispenser. You can either lie on the floor with your legs up in the air like this, but if that's hard on your hip flexors, just grab up another block or a bolster or some cushions or something that makes it easy for you to get your legs straight up in the air with no over gripping in your thighs. Place the block halfway between your pelvis and your knees and just start by squeezing straight in. So like elevator doors, coming straight in on each other, so you're not turning your legs at this point, just activating your inner thigh muscles. Your inner thighs connect in a nice line from your pelvis down to the knees, and then continue. The inner thighs don't continue, but there is a continued line of effect right down to the inner arches, so getting some nice strength in your inner thighs is an excellent contributing factor to maintaining the support for your feet. And then we go to the Pez Dispenser Exercise. So here, we're going to start trying to turn your legs right from the top of the legs in the hip socket so that your block pops towards you a little bit like a Pez candy. I don't know if you can see on the video that my block is very slightly traveling in towards me. As I keep the inner thighs active and continue to squeeze in on it, as I also turn out. And it's really important that you do the turn from your tops of your legs and your hip sockets, not from your knees or your feet. Your knees and feet just go with you. Here's another view where you can see that I'm trying to turn my whole leg as a unit. If you tend to be really tight and your legs are a bit like this and you can't keep your heels apart, then maybe try taking the block wider. You'll get less of the coming in and out effect, but it might make it easier for you to keep your legs straight and then work towards bringing your legs together. So that's the first exercise. And part of the reason that we do that is because it's important to start activating the hip muscles without the closed chain effect of having your feet on the floor, which ultimately is what you want, right? You want to have strong hip muscles and your feet down on the ground. But when there's tension at both ends of that chain, then you have to start working somewhere, and you need to sometimes make that place that you work the hips without the inhibiting effect of your feet on the ground. So even though this is footwork, we're working from your hips. The second thing that I really like to do, and again, this is more about sort of preparation than it is about having your feet on the ground, is clam shells. I like to do 3 different versions so that we get 3 different angles of focus on your deep hip muscles. So you start lying on your side. You want to get your ribs back a little bit so your core is stable, heels pressing together, and then turn your knee towards the ceiling. So everybody's heard about clam shells, everybody's probably done them. But I think the key thing to pay attention to here is that the goal is not to lift your knee, really. The goal is to activate the muscles in the hip socket. So think about turning your leg in the hip socket as you go, rather than thinking about lifting your knee. If you feel the work here in the front of your thigh, play with your range. Maybe don't go as high. Go slower. Really pay attention to what do you need to do to get the work into the back of your hip. Sometimes I do very small ranges with this and it's much harder. I can feel it more specifically. The second set, your feet stay lined up with your hip sockets, but you keep your feet on the ground. And you turn here. I don't know if you can see, my range is much smaller in this position. So we've got to the next 2 muscles down in the deep hip rotator group. This is a less convenient position for the legs in the hip socket, and I'm still trying to get the work into the back of my hip. If you're not feeling it in the back of your hip, you can go in and kind of, I like to do like a bit of a scratch into the tissues, can help to bring your brain's attention to the side of the hip. Or again, play with your ranges. Keep your heels pressing together. That can be a really good strategy for some people to get it deep into the side of the hip socket. and then you slide your feet forward. So you want to bring your shins so they line up with the front of your mat. You don't need to bring your knees up too high. That will tend to curve your back. And then you do the same thing here. Heels stay pressing together. And again, tends to be a small range. Look out for your whole pelvis tipping back, right? So that if your whole pelvis is shifting, you're not using your deep hip muscles. And I'll show you in a minute one of the ways that we can really get in and avoid that particular cheat modification. So you can do maybe 20 of those, 25 of each of those on each side, and then you can move on to the next version, which is going to require a wall. So here's one of the strategies for making sure that your pelvis doesn't rock back, which is to do that whole entire leg series with your shoulders, your bum, and your heels all lined up just in front of the wall. And then if you feel your pelvis tipping back, you know that you're actually probably using quite a lot of your back and your stomach muscles and gravity to turn your leg back rather than actually working right into your hip sockets. So this is a really good strategy for making sure that you are isolating your turnout right into the muscles that we're really trying to target that will help with that spiral down into your feet. And then we're going to start to actually work into your feet a little bit before we move on to the next exercise. So see if you can get your fingers right in between your toes. And then just start to move them. Just sliding your toes back and forth. You can use your hand to pull, and you open up the muscles in the front of your foot. Open the muscles that run between the ball of your foot and the back of your toes by pulling forward. And this process of just spreading them with your fingers is actually sometimes harder than it looks like it should be. If you can't get your fingers all the way in, just do your fingertips. And if you can't do all of them, maybe just do 2 and then the other 2 so that you have some space for your toes. And really move them around, move through the feet, because this is starting to get into some foot muscle, which is going to be helpful for the next phase of our series. And then just move your feet. We don't move our feet as much as we could or should or might. So just do that, both feet. Fingers go in between your toes and then move them around. Use the strength in your hand to mobilize. It's almost like you're massaging your foot with this little spacing and spreading between your toes, moving in, twist them left to right, up and down, and then fingers out of the way and just move your toes, move your feet. Point, flex, get a little crack. It's all good. And then we're going to use the wall again, and we're going to start to actually find that connection between your hips and your feet. So for this part of the program, you're going to find something to sit on. You probably can't see all the way, but I'm sitting up on a bolster. You want to make sure that the backs of your legs are not overly strained, and if the backs of your knees are uncomfortable, you can pop something underneath them so that they don't feel like they're dropping into hyperextension or that they're just unhappy and uncomfortable. You want to get your heels and the balls of your feet up onto the wall, and then you're going to externally rotate exactly the same way you did for your human Pez dispenser. And I don't know if you can see on the video that my feet have rolled onto the outside edge of my arches. So I don't have flat feet, and I'm not an ideal model for this exercise, but this is where my foot tends to sit. So I have actually really tight feet and high arches. But if I externally rotate so that I correct the position of my knee pit, so the 2 ligaments that run along the back of my knee are currently pointing on an angle off to my left, on my left leg. And if I turn my leg so that my knee pit, or those 2 ligaments, are pointing straight down at the floor, and let my foot respond to that shape, I've now got the inside edge of my foot is right up off the wall. So that's an indication of the tension in my foot as it relates to the position of my leg and my hip socket. So normally the ground dictates the position of my spiral, of my leg up to my hip. So I've taken that out of the way so that now I can see if I straighten out my thigh bone, this is what happens to my foot. So now I'm going to try to maintain this position of my leg in the hip socket and use my foot muscles to roll the ball of my foot, the inside edge of the ball of my foot here, as close to the wall as I can get it. And I really, really feel this work in through my foot on both sides, but primarily in through the inside arch. The challenge is to not let my whole knee slide back into center. So you can do this one leg at a time. You can do it both legs at the same time, whatever works for you, but you really do have to concentrate. And the goal is not necessarily about getting your foot flat to the floor. The goal is to experiment with what you need to do to work the muscles of the foot in here. And I'm going to Okay, so here's another angle of the same thing. This is my feet flat against the wall, allowing for my legs to turn in. As I externally rotate my legs so that my knees are actually centered, my thighs are externally rotated to what is truly neutral. If I let my feet go, the insides of my feet come up. Now I'm going to try and keep all this completely still and use my foot muscles to pull the inside edge of the balls of my feet towards the wall. And it is harder to do than it looks like it should be. The temptation is always to move from your ankles. See how my ankles are now shifting? And if I move my feet, my ankles don't move so much. Or to lose the external rotation at the hips. So the goal is not necessarily to bring the inside edge of your foot all the way to the wall. The goal is to play with how far can you get without moving anything else, so that you find those deep intrinsic muscles of your foot and they connect all the way up to the muscles of your hips. This is much closer to what you would actually experience if you were standing on the ground, because now you have something to aim for. So those are some really great preparatory exercises for helping to support the arch of your foot all the way up from your thighs. If you have any questions, let me know. Pop them into the If you have any questions, pop them into the comments below. I'm always happy to talk. Take care.